welcome back again for one more episode. Welcome to BetaCast, the Beta podcast on YouTube, where we invite you to follow inspirational interviews and good discussions around innovation and collaboration. We want to nurture these conversations on thematic seasons, and you can be part of it regardless of your background, professional or market sector, exactly because innovation is about collaboration and putting people together to solve challenges and make things happen. By the way, we would be supposed to have collaboration between those who create the laws and those who use them, between who sets the rules and those who help or should help to define them. And that's why we are currently having this innovation policy season in partnership with Google, where we already had guests from Allied for Startups and the Sifted News website from Financial Times. And this week, we are pleased to welcome Felipe Matos, a Brazilian who over the years has supported more than 10,000 startups and attracted $300 million in investments. He has played several roles in the entrepreneurial ecosystem as founder, angel investor, venture capitalist, educator, accelerator, mentor, and policymaker. Probably one of the key reasons for our invitation for you to be here. So, Philippe, thank you for your time and for being here with us today.
Thank you, Alison, and thanks, Beta, for the invitation as well.
Well,
Glad
Philippe,
to be here.
I know that you have a huge background in this topic. Could you share with us some of your experiences? I mean, you were a founder of Startup Farm Accelerator. You are CEO at Startup Brazil, which is super important for the Brazilian ecosystem. You are currently involved with the think tank Dínamo and the 10k.Digital platform. So could you share some key activities or maybe some key achievements on innovation policies over these years?
Oh, I'm sure. Well, I've been working with startups in Brazil for 22 years now. So it's quite a long time. And I would say that I've been fortunate enough to follow the growth of the ecosystem itself, playing different roles of it. So I started my first company when I was 16, and back then there was basically no ecosystem. So it was the first mobile app in Latin America that was before the smartphones. Just to give you an example of how the ecosystem was, my first angel investor had 80% of the company. And that was actually a good deal at the time. The choices were take it or fail, basically. So since then, I've been working in several initiatives to foster the ecosystem, not as an entrepreneur, but more specifically helping other entrepreneurs to start a business in their tech business and their tech startup. So I founded the first. I wouldn't call it an accelerator today. We used to call it back there, but I'd say it's more like a venture builder in Brazil. It's called Instituto Inovação. That was back in 2002, and there we started several businesses in tech, not only digital but related to the universities. So biotech companies, several startups. It was a huge learning period for me, and that thing evolved into venture capital. So I was one of the managers of one of the largest seed capital VC firms in Brazil, and funds. So Fundo Criatec Fund. It was a $25 million fund that started in 2007, which was probably the largest seed fund in Brazil at the time. And this evolved to InSeed, which is a VC firm that I've co-founded that is now part of Capital Group. I've also
and we are
founded
still in
Startup Farm.
2007.
Yeah, well, so let's jump to like more current times. I started Startup Farm. It was the first digital startup accelerator in Brazil. That was 2011. So we're getting closer now. Then I was the head and director of operations of Startup Brazil program at the federal government, the national government of Brazil. Was there for 2.5 years. It was also a very impactful program for Brazil. We've selected to around roughly 200 startups out of 3,000 applicants from all over the world that were backed by the program with both funding and acceleration support. And then after I left Startup Brazil, I started Dínamo with some other players of the ecosystem. It's a think tank and a nonprofit association to basically dialogue with governments to improve policies for startups in Brazil. And I think we have a lot to talk about that.
Yeah, and you are getting closer to the point in this sense, because being innovation policy season, it's interesting to figure out that you are currently involved or still involved with this topic. And if I understood well, Felipe, the Dínamo think tank advocates for public policy improvement for startups in Brazil. For sure, there are lots of things to be shared about this. But if you could go more straight to this point, if you permit me, in your opinion, what are the most important topics in the short term and also in the long term for startups in the Brazilian market?
So I would say overall, if you look at the Brazilian ecosystem, I used to split an ecosystem in 7 pillars. And I would say that Brazil is very well in some of them. In the past 10 years, we really lacked capital. This is not a problem anymore. I mean, we do have lots of funds and funding and capital available. Of course, there are some gaps and improvements that still can be made. But if you're an entrepreneur and you have a good project, you find capital. Then I would say we have talent, but now talent is becoming a bigger problem since the ecosystem is growing a lot and companies start to fight for talent because you don't have enough qualified developers and so on. And one of the main problems and one that hasn't improved a lot over the years is on regulations. So the Brazilian regulatory system is super bureaucratic. There are lots of problems on taxation, on registering a company, closing a company, getting invested, and securing a reasonable liability agreement with your investors. So to make it more clear, an investor in a startup, when that investor becomes a shareholder, this investor would be liable to on lots of issues and problems that startup might have in the future, which means that as an investor, you're willing to lose your investment. That's your risk, but you could lose even more if, for example, that startup ends up with some, public debt or something related to that. And these legal uncertainties need to be fixed so that they have a better ecosystem for startups. There are problems also in the way societies are registered. So in Brazil, you would probably, the most common path would be either a limited liability company, what we call the limitada, And there's also a version of a corporation with anonymous society, SCA, Sociedade Anônima. And if you go for limitada, it's cheaper, it's faster, but there are lots of management issues in terms of governance. If you want to get invested, there are some problems that a different model would solve, but it's super expensive to have an anonymous society in Brazil. There are lots of regulations, red tape, and reports that you have to make public in journals. If you go to this corporation model, you lose the tax benefits as an SME. So there are lots of problems when we look at the regulations and look at the needs of the startups, and many things need to be fixed in different ways: taxation, registration, investors' liability. Even the definition of what a startup is not really clear. And if you don't have a clear definition, it's super hard to create specific incentives. And this is also another problem, is when we try to put some kind of incentive, let's say a tax benefit for startups or for startup investors, you need first to understand what a startup is. And depending on how you design it, it could be either too big, or it'll open too many doors back doors for fraud. So it's very complex to build specific policies if you don't have the concepts really clear. And there are, in Brazil, we have jurisdictions that are national, but also at state level and city level. The way taxation works here, we have city level taxation, state level, and national level, and they blend and mix in different ways. Sometimes there are contradictions between them, even in the same level. So this whole mess makes the lives of entrepreneurs much more complicated. Well, the country is ranked as one of the worst. We are one of the world leaders in fiscal complexity, and that's also a major problem. Even for a startup, you have to deal with lots of red tape and rules.
If you permit me to say, I would maybe, with a few exceptions, the legal definition of a startup versus an SME, it's almost a global challenge regarding how to handle this community, this industry, this cluster for the near future.
I think, you're right. It's hard to come up with a good definition. I would say that the best attempts are probably the ones made in UK and Italy. And the way they're the best ones is because the definition is not super strict. And it's not like a startup is X, Y, Z. The way they did was create several topics that would classify you as a startup and saying that
like a checklist.
So you need to check at least 7 out of these 12 items. If you check at least 7 of them, you're considered a startup. Which I think was a good approach to it, but it's not easy, and especially not only the definition itself is challenging. The way you define it, you're from a legal perspective and from a public policy standpoint, you're also defining the size of your addressable market to be supported or not. So you're selecting in a way who can and who cannot access specific programs or policies. So it's very challenging.
Yeah, you were highlighting 2 very different aspects. I mean, on a more positive note, the capital availability or the investor's goodwill for compelling projects. On the other hand, you are just explaining a list of potential problems regarding regulation. I'm afraid your answer is going to be no, but I don't want to bias your answer for sure. But do you consider that legislation and public policies for innovation startup support in Brazil are keeping up with market reality and needs, or we are really far from that?
Well, you're right. We're really far from that. And the main problem is that we're the rest of the world is improving. So in comparison, we had a very bad regulatory system. We still do. And if you look back in the past 5 to 10 years, you see lots of actions in improving the business environment and regulatory environment for startups all over the world. Not only in the developed world, but also in several underdeveloped, or I don't like that term, but anyway, in other countries as well. In Asia, well, you see, look at Singapore, like what they did in the past years, just to pick an example. I've been part of a group called the Startup Nations group. So we have an annual summit, the Startup Nation Summit. And when I was part of Startup Brazil, I joined the group, and I've been part of it for the past 6-7 years now. And I've seen over the course of those 7 years how the startup topic has gained attention all over the world, and how all the countries were improving their regulatory frameworks and creating new initiatives. And at the same time, we did very little in Brazil. So if we were in a bad situation 6 years ago, we're even worse now, because the rest of the world is improving and we didn't improve much. So the gap is getting bigger, actually.
And if you could try to, and for sure we can find it, on a personal note, being Brazilian as well, it's pretty common to justify some of the situations in Brazil, even regarding prosperity or business achievements. I used to say there's a very clear division between daily economics and daily politics. That's why sometimes things used to go further. But anyway, if you could share with us, considering your experience, Felipe, what was the most important decision taken in the Brazilian legislation sphere for startups in recent years? Could you highlight one or a few of them?
Yes, I can highlight some of them. So the overall scenario doesn't look good, but it doesn't mean we're having improvement, and we are. It should be faster, but well, anyways, there is the new law. We call it the innovation law. It was reformed recently. That was an advancement because it has created lots of new concepts in it, and it goes in regards, most especially on two topics that I think are important for startups. One is the relationship between universities and the market and startups. Before the law, there were lots of uncertainties. If a public researcher would find out something and how it could be, that technology could be transferred to the market, that professor could start a company eventually, but he had links with the university. So how would be intellectual property? How would be there were several issues, and also some folks would say that it was not part of the role of a public university to support entrepreneurship because it was not written in any law. It would eventually go against the spirit of the public university for some folks.
Whoa, this is a super blurred situation or definition.
Yeah, and the law made really clear the definitions that yes, it's not only the role of the university to support entrepreneurship, but they have to have specific department and people to do it. And there were lots of regulations on how intellectual property would be split, what is the play of the university. So the law created a specific body inside the universities called MIT, which would translate as some entrepreneurship department and núcleo de empreendedorismo, entrepreneurship and technology department inside of each of those universities, and so on. And also, it said that public researcher can, if he or she will be a shareholder in a company that, in a startup that wants to explore some technology that was developed. So this was a good advancement. Another thing was in regards of public purchase. Because, the government buys
public
a lot.
procurement, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Public procurement. So it was very hard. It still is for public bodies to buy goods from startups or services, because they are innovative for nature, and by being innovative, they're also more like riskier, and risk doesn't fit well the public management and all the rules and everything involved. So startups, they really can't, they don't fit well, and they don't match the criteria usually in public tenders.
Not to mention all the liability previously designed.
Exactly. So this law created a mechanism that it's called encomenda técnica, or like how would you translate that? It would be a technical call, if you will. So the government would, through this mechanism, public a challenge that they have, and invite startups to create solutions to solve that challenge. And this law says that it is possible, and it sort of understands the risks of innovation and addresses in a way that the public official who is behind that process would not be liable for problems related to the innovative risk of that purchase.
Interesting. It's like, if understood well, it's almost like a tailor-made policy for public procurement, addressing startups.
Addressing startups and innovative solutions, exactly. And the challenge now is having that law used.
That's what I was going to ask you. That's what I was going to ask you, because it seemed that the examples you gave, they are more probably medium to long term in terms of results, in terms of impact. They are super important for sure, but maybe they be even more delayed thanks to what you are going to say, like it's up and running or not. So I was going to ask you this, and also if regarding urgent decisions, if you just to complete your answer with this specific topic. This is super important, but it's not for immediate results. What about the most urgent ones being done or that should be done?
Okay, well, there are lots. I'd say
you can cherry pick just one or two.
Okay, I would say solving the taxation mess that we have, and it's a general problem. It's not only a startups problem, but all companies in Brazil, especially the SMEs, face a very complex tax system in Brazil, and this system needs to be reformed urgently. And this is an old problem, a very structural one, a very hard to change because it tackles all spheres of public administration. Like our taxes exist in different levels, like city, state, and national level. And the way that budget is split is complicated. And if you want to change it and simplify it, you have to involve everyone. And there's always be winners and losers. So a lot of fights in this process. And I would say that the past few years politically, politics in Brazil were particularly challenging. We had a president impeached. We're now having another political crisis. So every time those crises pump up, the agenda, is kidnapped, and we can't really evolve. But I would say the taxation, and we do need a tax reform that is more wide, and if not possible to advance in a wider reform, at least to have something specific for tech startups or for SMEs. We do have a tax regime for SMEs, which is a bit better, a bit simplified. It's called Simples or Simple, but it has lots of problems still. Like, for example, if your company has a shareholder that that has shares of other companies that combined would sum up to a certain revenue or income amount, your company would not be part of Simples. And so
not because of the business, not because of the business itself, but because of the shareholder activity.
Exactly. But what happens is that you can't have investors, because usually investors are shareholders in several other companies.
For sure.
So once you have an investor in your cap table, you're automatically out of lots of the tax benefits that exist there. So companies avoid investors instead of want them. So investors they are bringing additional problems to the company in that sense. And because of that, the way investments are done in Brazil we have to create new creative ways of investing in a company without getting the investor becoming a shareholder. And this addresses some problems like this taxation classification, if you will, and also protects the investor from being liable on problems for the company. So we have to recreate some convertible note, sort of convertible debt agreements in order to make it possible for startups to get investment from angel investors and accelerators. Another problem on taxation is the way investors pay taxes on capital gain. There's absolutely no incentives for startups. Actually, you pay more taxes for gains on startups than on public debt.
Wow.
And there's also problems if you compare the taxes that are paid by a legal person and an entity. So individuals would pay less taxes than entities, which means that if you are an accelerator and are investing in a startup, you pay twice the tax on capital gains than a person, which doesn't make a lot of sense as well.
Felipe, you came up with very tangible challenges and very immediate ones. Looking from abroad, it seems that 2019 was undoubtedly a booming year for the startup agenda in Brazil. But on the other hand, just as you said, we are now facing in Brazil health crisis, an economic crisis, a political crisis. So all the goodwill that could have been built last year, it's now frozen because of this triple crisis.
Somehow it is. but we're also trying to catch up, but because we need to create responses to the crisis, specifically to the economic ones. So we're trying to to put some of the topics in the startup agenda as part of the recovery package of policy policies that are developed for recovery. So I'd say that in a way, this moment gives us the opportunity to push for some of the changes that we need, because these changes will help in accelerating the recovery process that is much needed, right?
But is there any measure being done specifically to tackle and to overcome COVID-19 economic impact on the startup ecosystem?
So yes and no. So not specifically for the startup ecosystem in regards to COVID-19, but we've been preparing a startup act, so a bill of law that would change several legislations to improve the overall regulatory environment for startups. This bill of law is being prepared for a couple of years. We at Dínamo were part of the process of writing this, and there were several dialogues with the whole ecosystem, the government, a public call for entities and to make suggestions to this law. There is a draft now that is expected to be sent to Congress. It was expected to be sent to Congress last year, at the end of last year. It's ready. It's on the Ministry of Politics Relations right now, but due to the crisis, it's on hold. We expect it to move as part of the recovery package for the economy that will be made in response to the crisis. And the Startup Act is probably going to be among the initiatives that they are being prepared to tackle those issues. So we hope that we could move on this. And I mean, I could be here like talking forever on many of the specific issues that still exist, and some of the advancements that are happening or that should be happening.
No, but don't worry. Yeah, but don't worry, because you're sharing a very comprehensive, big picture on what's happening in Brazil, and it's very interesting to see this information coming from someone from inside. So you are not only an analyst; you are part of the doers or the builders of this context. So let me jump to one more element of our discussion, which is given your experience. I know this is a super broad question as well, but would you be able to say what is most similar or most different about the current public policies for startups and the innovation ecosystem in Brazil when compared to other key countries such as US or Germany, France, Singapore, as you were speaking about, or even Portugal? We are talking between Brazil and Portugal, so you could have this comparison. Would you be able to share some highlights on this?
Sure. I would say that, like, in a nutshell, we are in different moments. I mean, so Brazil, the regulatory challenges that we have, we need to make things much simpler for business before we could catch up to the public policies of the key countries, as you said. And this is super sad because it puts us in a very competitive disadvantage in that area. The good side, though, is that Brazil is a huge country. It has a very big internal market. So
it makes the difference, indeed.
Yeah, and in a sense, the taxation system and the regulatory system is horrible, but it's the same for everyone. So it kind of sets up a level. As an entrepreneur, you need to fight several fights for your business to succeed. In Brazil, we have an extra fight, which is like fighting the bureaucracy and the regulatory system. But this is the same fight for everyone. So, in that sense, it doesn't create any unfair advantage or to anyone. We're all in the same level here. But what I'm seeing as part of the discussions in the other countries, since they have a base framework and a base regulatory landscape that is already much simpler and better for business, they have been advancing in discussions that we are still dreaming of, like specific incentives, like sandboxes to support startups in specific sectors like fintechs. We do have some discussions in that direction as well in Brazil, but they're not central at this point. We have more basic problems to solve first. So this would be the main difference, I would say. And specifically, when I look at Portugal, even for the health crisis and the economic crisis in this moment, the national government of Portugal has prepared a package of 7 different initiatives to support. So there's a startup voucher to support the entrepreneurs. There are specific issues for to help on incubation. There are lots of programs that we don't have anything similar to that in Brazil right now. The only program we had was a general one for any kind of a company to support on part of the payroll for companies to survive the crisis, but nothing specific to startups. To give you an example, so we're still lacking on several specific issues to support the ecosystem here.
So would you say that a tangible competitive advantage for Brazilian startups would be more related to the size of the market and then the potential opportunities to thrive, and not necessarily about any regulation or any public support?
No, I mean, we do have initiatives with public support. There are some in both state level, national level, or sometimes the city level. They could be more organized and aligned. Sometimes they're not, but anyway, things are moving and there are good initiatives. But the main thing is that we have more central and structural problems of the way the whole system works in terms of how to register a company, pay taxes, like the basics of doing a business. There are very, very complex and very behind the rest of the world. And this needs to be fixed as soon as possible. And this is probably the bigger problem that we have. But since it's super hard and super complex, what we have been doing is trying to catch up on other aspects. So there are programs that fund startups like Startup Brazil. There are programs that fund VCs from the Development Bank, from the FINEP, which is the research financer body that we have. There are programs in the state level with acceleration, like public accelerators, like SEED, Minas Gerais, which is on hold right now, but it was a very good public policy on that. There are some programs in research financiers, bodies of every state. The state of São Paulo have FAPESP, their foundation to support research with very interesting and then good programs to fund startups. There are coming out of some kind of research, like scientific research. So we do have many good initiatives that still they need to be supported and grow. There's space to grow, but the challenge basics is huge and is what is holding us back.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, you came up with a very interesting topic regarding Brazil, which is the fact that just like the US, for instance, Brazil is a federation. So this means that each state has its own budget. It can design some specific regulation or to allocate budget to a specific project. So the examples you shared probably are related to this. So it doesn't depend from the federal national government and can be designed and implemented by the local administration. So that's when the scale of a country or the market can become a problem, like in Brazil, as I was saying. So you're gonna have a smaller scale. It's easier to implement and to make it happen. And probably the two examples you share are really related to this fact, right?
Exactly. So a state cannot change the way the taxation system works. We could design programs to support entrepreneurs with funding or space, and in some other ways. There are some initiatives also of funds that would give tax credits to startups that would establish themselves in specific areas or in tech parks. These kind of initiatives are the ones that are being done more frequently, and these are the ones that can be done actually by local administrations.
Mm-hmm. Well, super. Just a last question, Felipe, to close our conversation for now. And at least here in BetaI, we are very much in the collaborative innovation space. What does that mean? Not only supporting national or local ecosystem acceleration, just it's somewhat related to examples you shared, but also the convergence between large corporates, startups, public entities, and so on. We are very much in this process of open/collaborative innovation, putting these stakeholders together for common growth or solving challenges together. This is just a speculative question to finish our conversation, but do you believe that this approach could be framed as a public policy for innovation, like to give support for this collaboration, for this convergence as a win-win model to thrive?
Well, yes, it could, and it should. And more specifically in Brazil, we have a very good scenario for that because it's a pretty big country, 100 million people. It's an industrialized country, one of the largest economies of the world. We're like between 8 and 9 in the world ranking of the highest GDPs and the largest economies. So there are lots of big companies in Brazil that could benefit from collaborating with startups. And there has been some initiatives to help in this collaboration from the public sector. One of them was one from the ABDI, the Association of Innovative Industries, or it's a public body, and they created a public call to support. So they basically fund or match funds with corporations that want to do some projects with startups. So they share the problems, would then share proposals of solutions to solve those challenges, and this public body would fund or co-fund and match funds with the corporation for the solution, especially in the much riskier part, which is the beginning of the trials and tests and pilots and so on. So this is just one example
Interesting.
of an initiative.
But does the money go to the corporate to fund the startup solution? Who manages this investment from the government?
I don't know. I don't know the specifics and the details,
Okay.
so I might be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, it goes directly to the startup.
No, interesting.
So it's a corporation buying a solution from a startup, and part of the cost of the solution is being funded by this government program. There is also some initiatives. There are some initiatives from SESI, which is it's a half public, half private body that has budget from the industry, from industries, and they do have lots of schools all over Brazil, and they a public call for innovation. So if you own a company and want to create some innovative project using technology, you can get some funds, but they're usually credits or in services and access to like equipment and people from the system to create your solution. And this is specifically for industries, both small and large. So you could leverage on their resources to develop a new innovation, either you directly or in partnership with a startup. And there are some other initiatives. I would say the problem is that those initiatives, they don't live too long. Usually, and the budgets are not that big. So even when they are good solutions, you have some political change. The person in charge changes. There's a different leader, and the criteria to choose which projects will remain and which ones will not is usually not very technical in terms of the efficiency and success of the program, but it's usually more political. So should I give credit to my oppositor? Probably not. So this process, and more specifically in Brazil, since our political landscape has been very unstable in the past years, I would say in the past 7 to 10 years, it makes it really tough to have public policies like this remain and advance. So those policies have been like very shaky in that sense.
I see. Well, in the end, it's always about people, right?
Yes.
Everything happens, but in the end, there's one person, there's a group of people who decides what has to be done, and that's why technology is here to serve, not to lead the change. It's all on us. Felipe, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your insider view of what's happening in the innovation ecosystem in Brazil regarding policy making and innovation policies. I'm sure our audience had the opportunity to understand this big picture, to have a glimpse of some comparisons with what's happening in Europe. And thank you so much again for being here with us in this BetaCast episode.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. And just to finalize, I didn't want to have this ending as a message saying that Brazil is horrible for entrepreneurs. So I think that the topic of this conversation was public regulation, and that's actually the worst side of the Brazilian ecosystem, unfortunately, even though there's lots of efforts being done to improve that. But I also would like to give or to leave you with the good side in terms of, we've never seen that much capital. I mean, just last year we had $2.6 billion in venture capital being deployed in Brazil, which was actually twice as much as 2018, $1 billion, which was also more than the double of the figure we had in the previous year. So we're having lots of investments. Brazil has 12 unicorns right now, and they're all recent from the past 2 years. We have more than 14,000 startups in Brazil. At least we had until and the ecosystem is growing and blooming. Lots of talent, lots of good and interesting startups, and in a way, the inefficiencies that we have in Brazil are also super interesting opportunities for entrepreneurs. So if you look at the regulations, you see a very bad picture, but it's the same for any entrepreneur. So
just as you said in the beginning, we have two sides of the coin.
It's just an extra fight that you have to have as an entrepreneur, unfortunately. But I mean, it's there and the market is there. And when you look at the market opportunities and the advances on other aspects of the ecosystem, I'll say that Brazil is a great place to be an entrepreneur and to start a startup. And this is probably one of the best timings ever, despite the crisis and everything, to be creating a startup in Brazil. So
amazing, especially because again, it's about people. Brazilian used to, when you talk about 40,000 startups,
14,000. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Oh no, sorry. 14,000.
Okay. You must be entrepreneurial by design, because when you don't have the legislation, or you don't have another people on the other side trying to support you, but instead creating crisis on another crisis and another crisis. That's why we had and we still have this space for thrive and to create amazing success stories. Felipe, thank you for your time one more time. This is BetaCast. You can subscribe, you can share, you can recommend, you can follow. There's more to come next week. It's our final episode with a member of European Parliament, just to wrap up all of this conversation on policy and innovation, not only in Europe, in this case, also in Brazil. Felipe, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
Thanks everyone for watching.
Bye.
Bye.